Right, in this video we're going to get to the bottom of these pumps. Now I did previously do a video this morning, and when I played it back I realised that the reflection of the light was on the DTI gauge and you couldn't quite read it. I wanted you to see it rather than me shouting it out. So these pumps fail quite often. We've always had them. We always say, oh, Brit part, ship part, blah 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 blah, but they always seem to fail. The problem with it is this. In the original Land Rover parts book, they state that there was a spacer between two gaskets, this and the block. So you had the pump, a gasket, a spacer, a gasket, and the block. But the spacer's been discontinued. You can't get it anymore. Well, you can't get it anywhere. There's not even a part number for it. So normally what you do is you just bolt this straight into the block and hope for the best, but they do fail. But we're going to get to the bottom of why they fail. So first of all, we're going to have a look at how this is operated. It's driven off the camshaft. Here's a camshaft. Here's what I made earlier. We're all familiar with this type of profile for a cam. This is for a valve. So you've got a sharp lift going up, it peaks and then it closes very rapidly. Alright, that's kind of easy. So fast lift, high point, fast close. You can see here as well, there is another set of lobes. This is for the vacuum pump. So for every turn of for every turn of this cam, the pump is operated twice on the vacuum pump. All right, so it's running quite fast. On here we have a special little cam, and this is the fuel pump one. This is what we call an eccentric cam. It's perfectly round. In fact, without knocking everything down, we can get our caliper out and measure it at its high point here, which is 36.5 millimeters, and we can turn it round and it's still 36.5 millimeters. So why is it like that? It's because what would we call maybe the on-ramp and the off-ramp is progressive. It's more progressive, it's smoother, if you see what I mean, and it's not sharp like this cam is here, if you see what I mean. It's very difficult to explain, but maybe you can see here what I mean. It's perfectly round, but it's offset, so it's an eccentric like me. So, but you can see, if you look very, very carefully, you can see where the pump has been running against this all the time. There should be a little bit of clearance towards the back, a little bit. So it shouldn't really be running here, or if it is, it should be just to say touching. Now we're going to get to the bottom of this by setting up this Maxion engine we've got here. I've taken it out of the container, and I've taken off the rocker box cover, I've taken out the valve, the rocker shaft, and I've also taken out the push rods, so we can put a cam sprocket on here and turn that cam, and we're going to try and establish, when I pick up all the nuts and bolts, we're going to try and establish where is the peak point of this cam. Alright, we're going to find out where its maximum height is. It's kind of easy to do, but it's a bit difficult to get your head around. So let me get set up and see how this is going to turn out. Right, first of all, we need a datum mark. So I've put a marker point on the corner of this casing here. Can you see that? Should be able to. Right, now I'm going to move the camera so we can look at the dial gauge, and we're going to establish a section of the cam, the eccentric before it lifts, and a section after. It might be easier if I do a little drawing to explain what I'm going to do. Right, with this no expense spared drawing, I'm going to show you what we're going to try and achieve. This here is the camshaft. This is round. Now we can see an exaggeration of the eccentric. What we're going to try and find out is whereabouts is that peak here. It could be very difficult to find out. It could be anywhere there. So what we're going to do is take a measurement here, and we're going to take a measurement here, because they're going to be quite easy to find. And then, once we've found those measurements, we go to our camshaft sprocket here, we'll put a mark here and here, and by dissecting that mark, we will be able to find out the centre of that point of the cam, which is at its peak, and that is the point that the cam is furthest out from the block, if you see what I mean. That's the maximum it's going to push the push rod of, not the push rod, but the lever here. So in effect, what we're trying to find out is this, right? That's what we're trying to find out, that. Is that going to work? Yeah, there you go. You see, that's what we're going to try and find out. We want that. So in effect, what's going to happen is that arm here is going to be compressed. You get it? Because if it was on the other side, like this, it would be at its free point. And when it's at its free point, this should be kind of easy to pump, because there's no pressure on that lever. I hope that's clear. So we've got our gauge on what we think is 0 here. It's 0.01. It's very fine. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn this back to go to -10 or -1. 7, 8, 9, 10. Put a mark here, and then we're going to come back the other way. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We're going to put a mark on here. Now between those two marks will be our peak. So we're going to write underneath here the P. That's our peak cam. Right? So I know it's a bit, we could go anywhere on there, but that's about where it wants to be. That's the peak of the cam. The next thing we're going to establish is the maximum stroke needed on that pump. So we go back to the bench and we'll set up this again with this dial gauge in the bench. Not in the bench, on the bench I meant to say. What I've done now is I've set this up in the vise. I've put 2 bolts through the pump flange so I can nip it up, and it gives me a free range to operate the cam. As you can see, the needle, the measurement moves. I hope you can read it. I'm going to zoom in a bit so you can see it better. There, so you can see the lever moving when I'm operating the manual lever on the outside. We don't want any more than that, because look, if I push that lever all the way like that, how much more can I get on it? Nothing. So anything over that is stressing it. So let's put that there and let's set that to 0 or thereabouts. Let's try it again. 0.2. Alright, so let's let that off, if it will. Let's call it 3.3 millimeters stroke. That's all it needs, is 3.3 millimeters. Now, having established it's 3.3 millimeters, I'll write it down on the bench. 3.3 millimeters. What we need to do now is establish the gap between the block and the pump face when that is on peak cam, on the camshaft, the eccentric. Let's go and set that up. Having found the top mark, we're going to go 180 degrees and mark the bottom, which is the back of the cam. That's easy enough. So this is going to be the back of the cam, so then we can establish what the stroke of that cam is, what the lift is. So there we go, we put that mark onto there. And we set it at 0 here. I've already done that. So let's have a look. If you can see that down there, I'll turn that and that's probably put that out a bit. 0. So now I'm going to turn the cam until it's at its peak. It's around about there. 5.91. Let's call it 5.91. That's its peak. Let's get some paper. Right, I hope you can get this. There's our eccentric. The lift point is 5.91 millimeters. Correct? The lift for our lift pump, the stroke, I didn't really do it, I should have done it parallel like that, but it doesn't matter, you get it. It was 3.3 millimeters, correct? That means we've got to have a gap of 2.61 millimeters between the pump and the block. Get it? That's it. That means then that the face of this cam here is constantly, just to say touching the back of this cam, just to say rubbing on it, but no pressure. The pressure is going to start around about here and here when it's starting to lift. You get it? How can you prove that? Well, we'll bolt a pump on and find out. So I hope you can see here, the marking on here is for the back of the pump. I have full stroke, right? The gaskets that I put in, I put 3 gaskets in at 1 millimeter per gasket because I wanted 2.61, but 2 millimeters was just a bit too tight, so I put 3 in. I'm not sure if they come in different sizes, I don't know. But if we can operate that cam, operate that lift pump throughout its stroke there. Now, if you noticed here, I've also put an S, a little S and an S there. And what that means is if I turn it to that S, I'm right at the bottom of the stroke here. And if I go around this way, I'm right at the bottom stroke, the opposite side of the cam. That means throughout this range here, look, we've got full priming until we get to the S here. Now, I'm going to do another experiment and I'm going to show you the problem with putting one of the aftermarket spacers in. This was sent to me, an aftermarket spacer, and you're supposed to put a gasket either side of it. However, when you calculate the full thickness, it's 7 millimeters thick, but we only want 2.61. Now, I'm going to fit this and I'm going to show you the difference it makes when we put the big spacer in, and you'll be surprised. Well, I hope you are. So I've put the spacer in, the 5 millimeter spacer, two 1 millimeter gaskets, a total of 7 millimeters. If I put this cam to the bottom of the cam, if I turn the cam to the back so that it should be just touching the lever, I've got maximum pump. But when I turn it to the top of the cam, the peak of the cam, I've still got maximum pump. That means that there's a space between the pump and the cam because I'm pumping all the way through its stroke. Now that could account for the reason why when I did this originally I could hardly get any fuel pressure with this. I bet the sun's shining in my eyes now, is it? That's better. So that means when I was doing this, fitted this spacer, I got very low fuel pressure because the cam is not compressing that lever. I can compress it with the manual lever on the side, but when I turn it to peak, I can still turn it. Whereas if I only had the 3 millimeter shimming, there was no lift because the cam was pushing the lever to its maximum length. That is the question, that's the solution. It needs 3 gaskets. Now that probably accounts for why I put 2 gaskets in. You know, I just put 2 gaskets in, but it really needs 3. Now I've never seen the original 300 TDI spacer. It's mentioned in the parts book as no longer obtainable, but I've never even seen one on an old engine. I've never seen one on any engine. So that we're all stressed out. So what we're going to do now is going to do another little experiment and just put in 1 gasket. Now I haven't turned the cam at all. It's still in its peak position. It's got 1 gasket in and there is no feeling on that lever whatsoever. When I had the 3 gaskets in, I could just to say pump a little tiny bit right at the bottom, but here look, there is nothing at all. If I turn it to the bottom, the back of the cam, I've got pump. But when does it start to stop working? Oh, there. Here. So I'll put a little circle there. And we come at the back of the pump. Now, if you can look at the front here, the pulley, I had an S and an S here, which went all the way through the range. Now, all you've got is between here and here. And that's why you have a terrible job trying to find out where the position is of the pump so you could bleed it through. So with our setup with the 3 gaskets in, you've got a better chance of pumping the primer at most positions 3/4 of the way around this cam than just 1 gasket, if you see what I mean. I hope that's clear. But at the moment, when we turn that to the bottom of the cam, we can pump. And when we turn it to the top, there's nothing at all. There's nothing. So that means the pump's too stressed out. There's, you know, so the shaft in the pump is pushing too far up against the diaphragm. You've got the diaphragm and it's trying to push up too hard. Whereas with the 3 gasket, it was that a little bit of space, a little bit of safety margin. Now I'll tell you what we can do. We can put well, let's see if I can find some setup. See if we can put some fuel in, find a can with some fuel, and let's try it as an experiment to see what the difference is in pumping.